work through what we call watercolor. There are a couple different kinds of watercolor. What you're looking at below you is called a butcher palette watercolor, which is a liquid watercolor that comes out of a tube, and you just squeeze it out like acrylics. I never clean my tray. I will clean the center before I get started, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But you can kind of see that I let the watercolor dry, right? Never clean a watercolor palette. For some of you, that's going to be super exciting. Other types of palettes are a cake type palette. This one's a little bit more high dollar. I usually buy about 3 or 4 of these for myself here. I discovered them teaching in the art room, and they're really a wonderful St. Petersburg, and they come in little almost candy-like shapes, and it gives you a beautiful variety of palettes, and then you can just open up and you can kind of pull out one at a time. The Prang watercolor at Walmart is absolutely perfect. It's a cake just like this, and it's almost professional quality, and it's like affordable. So, you know, don't go out and spend 60 bucks when you can go to Walmart and get a cake pan. Just make sure that they are translucent and not gouache. There's a huge difference between watercolor and gouache, and we'll do some lessons with gouache a little later. What I'm going to show you also before we get started are just some of the different brushes that I like to use. This is my absolute favorite when I travel. It's a self-contained brush, which just means the water's already in there, and all you have to do is kind of squeeze it. You'll see these actually at Walmart now. A lot of cartooners have gotten used to it, and you can kind of see me moving my palette now. And it will liquefy, and then you can pick that up and actually just paint directly with it. How do you clean it? You just go to your paper towel, which I have off the camera right now, and you kind of wipe it out. Paint with it till it's clean. These are called round brushes. Round brushes give you a really nice control into corners, and also kind of you know, big broad strokes. You can get calligraphic lines and things like that. We've been talking about lines, but I do like them when I paint with watercolor. I do like more of a soft bristle. This is what happens when the bristles begin to dry out. Okay, and you don't have, you know, didn't put conditioner on it or didn't wash it well, but you'll see it's not ruined per se as it gets wet. I just wetted my fingers a little bit, and it will pull together. But this is a problem. This is a brush that, you know, sometimes I would just use for tempera paint now, or even some acrylic, but it's not holding its body anymore. And this happens a lot of times when kids take a brush and they you know, do that with it, and then before you know it, all these fibers get broken down, especially in the cheaper brushes. They just won't handle scrubbing. So when I say don't scrub, this means don't scrub. Okay, that's scrubbing a brush. You really shouldn't be doing that. You should be pulling the brush so that the bristles stay nice. Okay, and I wouldn't want to demonstrate that on the bristles that are still together. You can see this one's starting to fall apart, and a lot of kids will try to take a you know, scissors and cut that out or try to pull those out. And that's just because this is a cheaper brush, and because you watered it, and you know, when you wash it, the brushes and the bristles just kind of start falling out. But it is a cheaper student grade brush. All right, but you can see these are all in great shape. They have their body, they bounce back. This one has a little chisel end which allows you to get a nice clean line when needed. I love those. Okay, and this again is a round brush. Some of my other personal favorites, when you do get a brush, you can see this one's a little worn out, right? It's starting to fray, but that doesn't mean I won't use it. I use it a lot. I do love a flat chisel brush. This one's in pretty good shape. It's just stained a little bit. Oh, staining is definitely okay. You can see on this one that it's stained. Okay, it's not a purple brush. It was white bristles, just a kind of cheap plastic. None of these are animal hair. They're all synthetics, which I find today work just as well as the animal hair. It's harder to find the animal hair. And then of course these come in, you'll see that it's solid, right? It's hard. You have to take those when they're new and soak them a little bit. That just means they're starched. Craft brushes work really well. What I'm going to do right now is get a larger brush that'll hold a little bit of water and begin to activate my palette, which means I'm going to put water on each section, just water. Because my color's dry, it's not going to pick up, and this is going to activate each of my sections. Other people use spray bottles. I've learned not to use a spray bottle in the art room for many and various reasons, and a lot of you probably won't have a spray bottle at home, but if you did buy your craft brushes, all you have to do is wet your colors. If you're working in the cake, it's the same way. Just wet them and let them sit. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of move that off camera, and I'm going to bring back your line drawing. Now the sketchbook that I bought is the blue cover, thicker paper sketchbook. And you can find those at Walmart, and it has the mixed media. They're a little bit more expensive, and may kind of cut you back on a couple pages, but they're well worth it when you start dealing with watercolor and some of the other media that's going on. Okay, I did my line variety design, and you can see that each segment has a little bit of change. I have my different textured lines, my implied lines, I have some spiral lines, I have thick and thin lines, and I've got it kind of moving in all sorts of directions that you're moving across the page. I do want you to limit the colors that you choose. You saw that I picked every color in the palette that I could just to wet it, but I'm going to maybe just stick to 2. And if I'll stick to 2, I won't overmix, I won't get muddy color, and I won't make mistakes. So avoid working in the grays or the blacks or the browns. Try to go with color. But I'm going to show you basically how to build up with watercolor and start with a very light mix and move towards a darker mix. I'm going to go ahead and stick with blue. And I'm going to start with a pretty big brush. And what you can't see is me pulling my color off palette to a little water. I don't know if that's in your view or not, but I'm going to pull a little puddle. And what I'm going to do is just work into a dry surface, almost as if I'm doing a coloring book. I'm going to start on the edge, and we're going to go what's called push the puddle. As I work my way across the shape, I am pushing or pulling that puddle. There's a little water over here, and you'll see that it'll grab that water. And I can get a very smooth shape this way. Now, while it's wet, I can always pull it. Now, I want to leave this shape alone. That's it, all right? And I'm going to let it puddle there. Push or pull the puddle and leave it alone. Don't go back into it. I'm going to go to the water puddle. I'm not adding any more water, but I pulled some blue aside, and I'm going to do another full shape. And I'm going to start from one side, and I'm simply going to pull that wet puddle. You can see a dog hair on there. I'm just going to leave it. And I'm pulling that. And you can kind of see the size brush I'm working with. Now let that kind of explode in the center. That's okay. Don't go over this too much, or you'll have too much different colors. It won't be solid. Now I'm going to show you a trick. I'm going to dry my brush. And when I'm drying on, it's just a paper towel. I'm drying my brush. And I'm going to pick up extra color. This is a trick in watercolor. Your brush is kind of a sponge as well as a paintbrush. It can pick up and move through. And then you can get a really smooth area, keeping it pretty light. So this is a technique called pushing or pulling the puddle. I'm picking up a little more water, a little more color, making my puddle on my palette. So I'm staying with one hue. Hue means color. And I'm going to start with my top section. And I'm going to pull the puddle. And this is kind of a little edge in my kind, and I'm just going to let that be. And I'm going to do one more. And I'm kind of scattering them over the page. This is a large shape, so I'm going to prep myself for a large shape with a little bit more of a puddle. If you have a prang set, you just make these puddles in the lid of the paint. Okay. And I'm going to pull that section. And again, as long as you work wet onto the dry, you're going to have a lot of control. Do not pre-soak your paper for this. And you'll notice it gradiates here. Gradation means it went from dark to light, and it wants to pull the way the water went. I'm going to leave those little nuances, and I'm going to call that my first layer. I'll let that dry, and I'm going to come back in a minute and put in a little bit of a darker color. And then after that, we'll walk through and put a second color on top of our blue layer. Bit of a darker hue. This time I'm gonna go ahead and move my palette on top. It should be pretty clean. Hopefully I'm not putting anything on the back of my work. I'm gonna go back and pick up a little bit of water. With seeing my palette, you're gonna be able to understand how I'm making my color. Whether you have a cake or the tube colors, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna go ahead and pick up more color. Now, in order to get watercolor darker, that means you just need more pigment, less water. Water is the vehicle for watercolor. The pigments between water, acrylic, and oil are really all the same. What's different is the vehicle. Oil paints will use oil, and acrylics actually use a clear polymer, which can adapt to water. That really is one of the main differences. So if you're ordering from like Winsor Newton oil paints have exactly the same pigments as their watercolor paints. The vehicle changes between oil and water. So vehicle is what allows it to move. So if you want watercolor darker, you have to have more pigment. But you don't want to have so much pigment that you block out your surface. So that's kind of one of the fancy things on watercolor. Now, I said we could add a second color. This is straight blue. Now, my blue will probably be different than the blue that you can get at a Walmart or in your praying sets or in a little bit more economical set. Professional colors are usually a little more vivid. Praying has very equal to almost Winsor Newton hues. When I do match them, I find that they're, for a cheaper set, they're pretty incredible color. I'm going to stay to the blue-green, so green is going to be my second hue. And you can see that it's so old that it's kind of coagulating over there. It's wanting to pull up on itself. So I'll probably have a few chunks because I've let my palette sit probably a little longer than I should. I should refresh this, but for demonstration purposes, I'm not going to worry about those chunks. This is not a piece that I'm going to sell. So I'm pulling a little green. You can already see I got a little blue in it, and I didn't really wash my brush 100%. That's it. That's all I'm going to add to that. Let me see if I can pull that out any different. Let's put a little more. I am going to clean my brush now. I'm cleaning in the water that's off camera and pulling a little more green. And this time I'm going to pick up a bit more pigment. I'm making a pretty good sized puddle because I don't want to have to come back. I don't want to have to make a puddle again. I'm going to work directly out of that puddle for this next layer. So when I'm saying pushing the puddle, making a puddle, working from a puddle, that's my puddle. You can use a styrofoam plate to make puddles. That was one of the things in your supply list. So I have added my second color. I'm not working what I call straight from the palette. What I'm going to do now is just choose something fairly close and next to what I've already done. This is dry. Doesn't take long. It really only spent about 5 minutes. Sometimes when we're in class, it's just real easy to just say, hey, hang out, check out your Google Slides, look at your vocabulary, but that's an easy way to work. All right, you will see that this one now, and I'm going to leave space between each one this time and try to scatter it over like I'm doing pepperonis on a pizza. What a beautiful color. I wasn't real sure how that would work. And what's beautiful about it is just how elegant and rich that color is. When you mix color, you create something that can't be repeated exactly the same. And that's what makes artwork so beautifully unique. Now notice I'm really slow on this. I don't think I should show you a speed painting by any means. I do not want to paint over that again. Please, please, please do not paint with watercolor. Put it down, let it go. I am going to go ahead and capture this and smooth this out. Well, it's wet, you can smooth it out, but I don't want to go over that whole thing again. You can see the beautiful surface that's starting to happen in that shape. So learning to put it down and learning to leave it alone. I'm going to go ahead and, I love this color, so it sounds like a great color to put in my centerpiece. This paper is helping my painting because it's designed for multimedia. If we're in the classroom, I will give you a piece of high quality watercolor paper. If you're at home, you'll probably have to paint on whatever you have available. I was getting a little caught. I have a light on the side. If I don't put up lights, my artwork looks a little dark. So I got kind of caught up there on the light. It's causing a little bit of a texture issue. Okay, so I'm not real pleased with that texture. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and put, well, it's wet, a second layer. This second layer will also darken it. Now, I'm not gonna come over this more than twice. Whatever happens on this layer, I am going to leave it alone. What will happen is if you go over this too many times, the paper will actually start to ball up and pull on you, as this is not high quality watercolor paper. And you can see when I do that, see that back drag? That's because the brush works like a sponge. I don't know if that line will go away, if it'll pull it out or not. That's why you don't want to go back through, because literally the paintbrush works like a sponge. But I can show you a technique to create that texture, and we'll maybe do that when we get a little darker. It works really well in a dark layer. All right, let's see. Part of the fun is finding where I'm going to space, and if I do colors, I kind of pull my eye. Your eye will want to connect to colors, so it's maybe something over here. This seems a little obvious, maybe set in the corner, but then that may already creates an edge. So maybe I want to bring you back up here. So I'm just going to do 3 on this one. And another fun thing is I could just do that little shape right there, but I think I'm going to do this edge. It doesn't matter what side I start from. It's just natural for me to pull from left to right because I'm right-handed. A left-handed student might pull the other way. And again, I'm just gonna pull, and don't go over it too many times. If your brush is smaller, obviously you'll have to, stay connected a little bit more. And again, I like that fray that's pulling there. I could darken this edge, and I might do that. Just a single line, I'm on the tip, and I'm gonna darken this edge. And this is another great way to darken something. Just tap. And the water will pull. Don't get too dark too soon. I'm gonna let this one go a little dark though, just to show you can get pretty dark. Now it will dry lighter than that. Let's go up here. Okay, and let that flow a little bit and just leave it alone. All right. Now I'm gonna go ahead and mix two colors together in one square so you can see that. I am going to stay to my green, so I'm gonna pull my green and make a puddle of just green. And what I'm gonna do is start with green to one edge and blue to the other and let them mix in the middle. And that creates a really beautiful effect. So I have green on my brush because I picked it up. I'm gonna put green on this side. I'm not gonna really clean my brush. I want this amount of water, but I'm gonna pick up the blue now. And I don't mind if the green mixes in it. And notice it's pretty heavy puddle, because this is a little awkward for my painting because it's the opposite direction. It's gonna have to think about it, slow down a little bit, and let these two go together. And there it is. You'll see it start pulling there. Okay. The last one that I'll do for you is a little bit of texture. And what I'll do on this one is I will go ahead and wet the surface. And I'm gonna have a little color on my brush, but I'm just gonna wet a section. Let's go ahead and do this very lightly. And you can kind of see I have a little color. This is called a wash. Now this one I'm not worried about keeping smooth, so you see me moving a little faster because I'm really just intending to wet it. And I wanna do some exploding watercolor. So I'm gonna pick up my rich dark color and I'm going to tap. Tap. And tap. Don't fill too many polka dots in there. It gets too much. And you'll see that it will pull. So let's do one more like that. And it's my brush. Let's go down here. Again, I'm gonna put in just water, and you can see my water's tainted. And that's because the watercolor starts to stain your water. So if you need a really light tint, just leave the water, okay? And again, I'm gonna saturate the page. This time I am gonna brush over it a little bit because I'm not letting this, this is really not what I'm painting, but I'm trying to remove the starch from the page. And I'm gonna go to green dots. Green not wanting to move as much as the blue. And I can get some beautiful fanning. And the water will pull these. And sometimes I've done this. I put a blue dot in a green dot. I get a lot of blue. And let them mix together. Sometimes when you just work in the center. This is because the paper is starting to buckle. It's running towards the water and it will run to the edge. Right? So that's called a wet into wet technique. And you'll see if you tried to paint a straight line in a wet paper, the watercolor will not allow you to do it. When we come back, I'll have this finished for you and I'll show you how to finish up your product with a white pen.